Thank you for inviting me here to speak. Unfortunately, due to work pressures, as Deep said, we couldn't have Peter here. I'll cover more about that as I'm presenting, but yeah, it's been a bit of a challenge for him to be here. Then it goes through the background of how the group came to be, the Mental Health and Cybersecurity Foundation. Basically, what happened was I was chairing a 2-day CISO event, and towards the end of the first day, sort of one of the sessions after lunch, we were talking about, how we as CISOs were finding things had changed over the last 15, 20 years. And as we were going through that, by the end of the session, I started to feel that there was a lot of emotion in the room. And I said, I'm feeling a lot of emotion in the room. Is anyone interested in writing up about this? Because I've not been in a session that I've chaired where there seems to be so much feeling in the room as a result of that discussion. And 2 hands went up, Peter and Paul, and the 3 of us met together over a series of months. And what we found was that basically there was a lot of research that had been done. And a lot of that research that had been done was in the form of surveys. And we felt that these surveys, if you're not an academic, would be okay. But if you're an academic, you would interpret these surveys as being incidental or maybe not that valuable. And part of the reason why they would think it's not valuable is because they'd probably turn around and say, do you know what? Anyone who's stressed, they're the sort of people who are going to respond to stress surveys in our industry. If you're not stressed, what reason have you got to participate? Because this is not an academic survey. It's not done very well. So we looked around for evidence and we couldn't find any evidence which was academic evidence to actually verify that there was a lot of stress in the industry. However, there was all this other research that had been done, and we came across so many speakers who had been talking about it as well. So that was quite interesting that's what we found. So that in the end, we published a report that was about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, during Mental Health Awareness Week. And as a result of that, we then started to talk at events. And then not last year, the year before last year, we then put together in October an open meeting and pulled together some people, and that's how we formed the foundation. It's still in the early stages, which is why we have got an executive steering group. But that's been our background as to how we came about. In terms of what we were trying to do was, we understood that mental health concerns were increasing, not just within the industry, but right across society. But in particular, within our industry, we started to look at the pressures that were due in business and enterprises from digital transformation, from all the things that went on during COVID. But the time that we had our conversation at that CISO event, it was interesting because it was a month after the events that took place in the US, with the Uber CISO being thrown under the bus, as many of us felt. And so many things that were in our minds were coming out. And that's a result of, this whole organization, the foundation, was as a result of all those things. So I'm not going to go through and read the slide, but that's really what our background was. And it's interesting that if you look back to last week on the BBC website, this is on the 30th of September, that was one of the big headlines. And I just caught on TV, I wasn't in the UK at the time, I was abroad, but I watched BBC News outside of UK. And it was interesting. Hold on, sorry, somebody's here trying to join the event. I've just admitted them. So I saw this and I saw the interview to myself. This is really interesting because it's not just something that we thought that was going on. It's something that actually is going on as a result of some of the attacks that we've seen earlier this year, that we're finding that there is a lot of burnout and a growing problem within the cybersecurity industry. So I thought I'd put this slide in because it's not just Marks and Spencer's, it's not just Co-op. We know we've got Jaguar Land Rover, we know we've had Harrods. There's been a whole range of these things going on over this past few months. Now, in terms of our foundation, Yeah, it's because I had to let somebody else in. That's the reason it didn't work. Yeah, there you go. So the foundation stream. So when we formed the foundation, we decided to break it up into a variety of things as to what we wanted to achieve. The two groups that we first set up one was a charter group, the other was a community of practice. And over a period of time, we set up the research group because we wanted to make sure that we were involving the community and working with the community and coming up with some research that could be, open to academic scrutiny. Also, we founded the awareness group so that we are speaking at events, we're writing papers, we are writing articles and so on. And the top there, the framework group. The framework group was set up last. We did have Annabelle who created the first version of our framework. That is due to be released soon. We were hoping to get it ready for the end of this week for Mental Health Awareness Day, but unfortunately we're not going to be able to meet that deadline, but we have got a framework which we are going to be releasing. It's the first version and we are building on that. I'm not going to go into great detail, but the next slide does cover some of the things that we are putting into that framework. So we've got 9 principles that we're working on, and the 10th one actually ties all of them together, which is around the research. And in terms of these principles, when we looked at these principles and some of the work that we're doing around them, we've created some depth on one of those, which is the first one. And what we're doing is we're working with the community and the industry to create some more detail around the others. And that's when the version 2 will come out, and we will be promoting that and publicizing that. The first version is working on the principles and the details of that first principle. The key thing that we were looking at, I mean, we had an event earlier this year which looked at these and expanded some of these. At that event, one of the sort of comments that was consistent was, you're talking about these, but some of these can apply outside of cybersecurity. And we were cognizant when we put this together that yes, and that first slide I put up, it mentioned that mental health is increasingly affecting all members of society, and we were very aware of that. And when we pulled the principles together, we knew that this exists and it impacts lots and lots of people. But within our own industry, rather than write mental health this, mental health that, and cybersecurity this, cybersecurity that, and keep repeating it, cybersecurity, the way that we've put this paper together and this first version is that we wanted to make sure that we didn't keep using the words mental health, stress, burnout, and use the words cybersecurity within this. We wanted to create a framework which was open and rigid, so open and not rigid, and quite flexible to a whole range of it could be applicable to a wider audience rather than just the the cybersecurity audience and mental health exclusively within that audience. So that's the start of the framework that we've got. Now, if you are interested in getting involved in any of the groups, including this one, I will give you some information later on, but there is a lot of work that's being done around this. What I'm going to cover next after this section here is really some of the work that Peter was going to cover had he been here. Peter's work works for Admiral, and some of the work that he's been doing within Admiral has been as a result of the work that him and Paul and myself did when we first set up the foundation, but he's been putting it into practice within the Admiral group, and that's what I'm going to be covering. He would have been covering it here himself, but I'm going to be doing that now. So the starting point of that was really that they wanted to do everything within Admiral, but they wanted to make sure it was evidence-based. And in terms of evidence-based, they wanted to understand where they were coming from. And in terms of where they were coming from a background where the security program that they initiated way back in 2017, it focused on creating industry-leading capabilities. So they had some things in mind, but then from 2017 to about 2 or 3 years ago, it grew from 13 to 130 people in that team. So it's a big, fast-growing team. And that was the background. And they wanted to look at that and then look forward as to what they should be doing. And in terms of how they started to work on that and looking at risk, they knew that it's very important to look at the data. And in terms of the data within the team, they wanted to make sure that how they impacted everything within the organization was going to produce some very definite results that they could point to, that they could say, this is definitely as a result of the work that we're doing. And it's had a big impact as a result of these changes that we're making. So they worked through the wellbeing categories. They asked a bunch of questions and they went through these questions, and they wanted to make sure that everything they were doing came back to some of the things that are here. Now, I'm going to go through some of those other pieces of work that they covered. So they looked at the root cause. What was the root cause? What were they doing? What are the different teams working on? Where are the stresses within the teams? What causes the stresses within the teams? So they started to look on at those sorts of things. And some of the things that they found were words that people used on that right-hand side there. So they saw these, and we've talked about in many times in the past at events how cybersecurity is often siloed from many other sections. But not only that, cybersecurity itself within its teams is siloed as well. And that created some of the problems that they had. Also, they were looking at the security operating model and how that was expanding over a period of time. And as you can see within Admiral, it started small from team 17 to 13 to 130. And the teams have got bigger and bigger, and their operating model has expanded and extended over a period of time. And then they started to look at, okay, so this has been going on. How are we going to impact this? So they started to look at the changes that they needed to make. So they created a structure to meet the business needs of cyber, and they started to prioritize, manage workloads, provide open communication. So they started to look at some of the basic things that they needed to do. And those basic things, go to the next slide now, actually had an impact on their cybersecurity charter, which they created and put together. And within that charter, they started to, as I said earlier on, they were looking at how can we make sure this is evidence-based. So some of the things that they looked at was these questions in the wellbeing category of 2023 versus 22 scores. So they started implementing some of the changes that we're making in that period. And the results here, this is a delta and the changes that they had. This one here, the demands of my job do not regularly cause me stress. In 22, it was 39, and then it went up. And each of these scores here were from one year to the next. Also, what they were looking at within their teams, they pulled together the mission, the best in class, and they started to work out what is it that they would be working towards, what are the things that we can do now within that structure that they had. And as a result of that, what else they did was start moving things for staff there, and they started to impact a whole range of activities and how these activities will be able to impact and reduce the stress. So some of these things here, they started to look at some of the meetings that they had. Instead of having 1 hour meetings and conference calls, they started to reduce them to 50 minutes. Instead of having 30-minute calls, they had 25-minute calls. So they were giving space, and it's not loads of space, but it was enough space that started to have an impact. Also, instead of sort of in the same way, if you look at development teams, software development, that is, software development often works on sprints. And what they started to do was to introduce sprints within cybersecurity, and they'd have 2-week sprints. And how they'd organize these 2-week sprints is they would allocate 8 days of work to be done in 10 days. And if you manage to do it in 8, it means that you've got 2 days free to do all the other things that you might want to do. And some people started to do voluntary work, some people started to take time off. But whatever it was, they started to look at how they could actually have these sprints where they would make sure that there's enough work for them to do within the 8 days. And not only that, but they started to get feedback and start improving, because obviously first day that you try it or the first time, it's never going to work. So over a period of time, they started to gauge how much work is effective and how you can fit in the right amount of 8 days of work within 10 days. They also started to form, as you can see here, some of the groups they've got. They started to have little gifts for each other. They started to pull together. So they got barbecues. They started to have film nights, yoga. They started to do lots of events and things within the teams for the teams to get to know each other far better. All of these little things added up, and as a result of them adding up, they started to find that there was much better well-being. So they had well-being reps. They had movie nights, which they got involved in. They started to do the couch to 5K and just do it. And they started to pull together well-being meetings that they had, and started to really to get out more and more to the staff that weren't actually engaging in the early days. So over a period of time, they started to make sure they were bringing all that in. This is some of the practical things that they did. And as a result of that, they did start to have a lot of big changes within the organization. Now, those are practical things that they did do, and those things work for them. Now, they won't necessarily work for every organization, and this is where the framework comes in. So they've done some things. Now, that most of what I've covered is very quickly, and not as well as Peter would have covered it. We pulled together a case study, and we are looking for case studies. We're working with a whole range of organizations. So if your organization is trying something, or it's doing something, or it has done something, we would be very interested in working with yourselves around that and using yourself as a case study. But also in terms of the framework, what we are doing is working with organizations where we are bringing in things that have worked for those organizations, things that haven't worked for those organizations, but also we know that there's no one way to fix everything for every organization, because within organizations, the cultures are very, very different. And because we've got different cultures within all organizations and within teams, there's no one thing that even within a single organization, what might work for one team may not work for another one, either because of the way that they work, or the personalities, or the size of the team, how long the team's been going, whatever it might be. There's many reasons as to why things may not work. So what we're trying to do is bring into the framework things that do work. Now, in terms of that, within the framework, when we looked at the framework and started to work on the framework, what we wanted to do was look at things that individuals can do, look at things that teams could do, look at things that organizations can do. So we're looking at all those levels within the enterprise. But on top of that, we also wanted to look at the industry and what the industry needed to do, and the community, wider community needed to do. So, and this is something that I feel very passionate about, this particular part, because it was one of the things that became apparent in the very early days, which is that if you're leaving one job and you're leaving it because you're stressed, let's say you're a CISO, or you work in the network group, or you work in the pen test group, or you work in incident response, wherever you work, if you're leaving one role because you're stressed and you want to move to another one, at the moment, do you tell the team that you're leaving because you're stressed? And if you do, how will that reflect on the reference you get from them when you move to your next job? Do you tell your recruiter? But you can't do that, because if you tell your recruiter, what's going to happen is their duty is to the person that the organization, the enterprise that you're going to, because that's who's paying them. Will they tell them if you tell them? At the moment, we're in a situation where we cannot be honest about being stressed, leaving one job and going to another one, because of the way that the industry works. So we have involved within the work that we're doing, recruiters and recruiting bodies who are going to help us put that part of the framework together, so that at the industry level, we are making changes that will make a big difference. Also at the industry level, many of you, I'm sure, have got certifications. If you look at the certifications that we've got, a high percentage of certifications around cybersecurity focus almost entirely, and yes, I know there's one or two that don't, but majority of them focus almost entirely on the technical stuff that you need to do in cybersecurity. They don't focus on the people skills and looking after ourselves type skills. And they call them soft skills, but they're not included in those certifications. So we are hoping to work with industry bodies, certification bodies, and hoping to change that, where we can start getting them to start responding to these sorts of things, because at the moment, these things aren't looked at. But not only that, when we were researching a couple of years ago, we found that if you look at the cybersecurity strategies of nation states around the world, if you look at cyber resilience, all the cyber resilience strategies around the world will say the cyber resilience of our nation relies on the cyber resilience of our enterprises. However, what they don't say is the cyber resilience of our enterprises relies on the resilience of the people in this room and people listening to online. We're in that position where we are letting outside organizations and bodies assume that the resilience is somehow magically going to work, even if we are not resilient and our teams are not resilient. So this is something that we're campaigning on, and we think it's very, very important. Also, we've been talking about, over the last few years, we have been talking about the key aspects that we think are important around and how we are a different case. Yes, stress, mental health issues are right across the board, but how we are different is because of the fact that in an organization, marketing, sales, finance, if they're stressed, the impact of the stress of any of those teams is different from the impact of stress within the cybersecurity team, because stress within the cybersecurity team is going to affect your cyber resilience. And over this year, as a result of the attacks that we've had, Marks and Spencer's, Harrods, Co-op, Jaguar Land Rover, we've seen the impact that has on the organizations themselves. Jaguar Land Rover is still experiencing the impacts of that right now. These are the sorts of things. So what we're saying and have been saying is, this is the reason why we are a different case. We're not like any other team. We're not saying we're special. We're saying we're special to you, because if anything happens to us, it's going to impact the whole organization and the livelihood of the whole organization. And that's the reason why we are a particular, a different case. Over here, you see that Admiral have signed up. This is a charter that we have. They've signed up to the charter. And the way that we work the charter is that we say that at the moment, we're not making it formal as to what you need to sign up to. You can sign up to anything you want to. You can sign up to the charter and say, we think we would like to do this, or we pledge to do this, whatever it is. You can choose one item, you can choose 5 items, you can choose anything you want to. It's that informal. But we are going to formalize it a bit more in the next few years. But basically, Admiral signed it, and they signed up to a lot of pledges. And some of those pledges come from different organizations. We're not just working with enterprises that employ professionals. We're also working with industry bodies. We also work like ISF. We're working with them. They're great partners of ours. We're also working with recruiters, I mentioned earlier on. We're working with event organizers. We are working with small organizations and large organizations, pen testers, and so on. So we're working with a whole range of organizations, and each organization, depending on what it does, it will determine what they sign up to and what works for them. So effectively, you don't have to sign up to any one thing. You can sign up to whatever is relevant for yourself. And if you like, we've got a couple of teams that have signed up, teams within an enterprise. So it's not their enterprise that signed up. It's the team saying, we as a team would like to sign up to the charter, and we agree with the aims of the charter, and we would like to work with you and see how we can improve things. So if you are interested as an organization to sign up to our charter, or you're interested in that, do let me know. Next is how you can be part of it. So you can join us on LinkedIn. You can send us an email to join the community of practice. You can sign up to the charter. You can also, the next slide, I'm going to cover if you want to get that quickly. We have got a survey, so if you want to participate in the survey, you can participate. We have got that running by someone who oversees our research. We work, in terms of the research that we do, we look at research in 3 different groups. There's research that we think that needs to be going on all the time, and we don't want to stop it. That's where we started when we found the research that we found. And that research that we saw at that time was all those surveys held by event organizations and so on. And all that research, we want to help carry that on. So what we're doing is we're working with event companies or anyone that's doing that sort of research and encouraging them to say, look, do you know what? It's great that you want to cover this. That particular topic that you're looking at, that niche, is covered by other organizations. Why don't you widen it up, or why don't you look at this? This would be a more interesting angle to look at it from. So we are doing that sort of research. We're also doing research which we believe needs to be done, but it can't be done by surveys like that, which we think will needs to be done within enterprises. And this is the evidence-based research that we were talking about, and what works, what doesn't work. So that's the second type of research that we're doing. The third type of research, we are engaging with some of the academic organisations around UK and trying to work with them so that we can have some academic bases and academic research that could back up what we're saying as well. So there is, if you participate in this research, this is our own research, that would be great, and you can do that online. For other information, we have got the community of practice, the charter, or you can just email me, or you can join our LinkedIn group. As I said, search for mental health in cybersecurity. The website, the company I work for, we were hosting it at one time, and we wanted to make a clear separation when we set up the foundation. So we have separated that, and we are working to produce that. At the moment, we are an informal body, but we are going to formalise that by becoming a legal entity, and we will seek charitable status at some point as well. At the moment, we haven't got to that point, but we are working on that. So we will do that within the next couple of months at the moment. So that's everything about us. I'm going to open up for questions now, and I'll pass to yourself.
No, I'm just saying, please can you log it online as well if there are questions. So,
all right, okay, I'll leave it for you to. This forward chats.
yeah, go open chats. Right, so there are some things. Right. So I think there's a comment from John. Right, so John Mitchell, who is chair, is joined online, and his comment is, "This is very useful, Sarb. The IIA has shown no interest in tackling this subject." Which was very interesting. So maybe we can work on that. Are there any psychologists involved in the group?
Yes, we have got 3 people who are on the executive steering group. So we've got a couple of people from the enterprise background, like myself and Paul and Peter. We've got our lead who runs the community of practice. She is a psychologist. She has worked for MOD and Cranfield. So she's from an academic background in psychology and occupational therapy. We have got someone who is in the US who has done some work with groups. And when we brought him onto the executive steering group, he was already working with Admiral on some of the work that they were doing, but Peter didn't know that when he started to work with us at that time. We've also got our researcher, head of research, he is also from a psychological background and cyber background as well. So we've got those three people.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks. And there's a question from Richard. Why is this industry specific? I think you mentioned that. Yeah, and he's saying it is not well-being the responsibility of all organizations, management downwards.
I'm not sure the question, sorry.
I will start again.
Yeah.
It's basically that we see I can extend it.
Yeah.
So Richard asks, why is this industry specific? Isn't well-being?
Yeah, absolutely true. As I tried to explain earlier on, right now in the world, everyone is more stressed than they ever used to be, and it started in my mind after COVID. I've heard more people saying that they're stressed after COVID than I ever did before then. It may not be COVID related, but my feeling it was. But as we found out in our research, lots of industries are being affected by stress. But from our perspective, we're in the cyber profession and we only know about the cyber profession. I've been in cyber for 25 years. That's the only thing I know. And having been in the industry, I know how stress within my profession impacts the organization. And that's where my focus is. So I can only talk about my industry or our industry. I can't talk about generally. I will let other people work on those. But because I care about my industry and my profession, that's where my focus is. And I can say that it does impact the whole organization, and with the examples I've given earlier on.
Thank you. Any other questions from the room?
Quick observation. Yeah, I'm just sorry to hear that it's stressful industry. I mean, luckily I'm not in it, so it's interesting hearing about it anyway. But I think it's very interesting to tackle some of these softer skills you allude to. You know, on training generally, and universities are talking about it, people coming out with soft skills and the various elements you need to be personal skills and various areas that a lot of the traditional teaching and lecturing is perhaps lacking, and people coming out into industry without being able to engage. So that's good to hear, and I think it's great it's been addressed within companies, you know, a lot as well. And yeah, I just think it sounds very positive. Some of these areas being addressed, definitely, but it's obviously quite this issue exists in many industries and very many roles, but it seems like it's quite. This is one of them that's sort of feeling a bit, but hopefully some people are feeling better after COVID. Not everybody's perhaps, and it's been worse. I mean, I personally feel no different, but it depends on, I guess, what environment you're working in and how you're managing it. You know? So observation.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Olivia, go on.
A comment and then a question. Insofar as that cyber is information technology and data, and all departments in an organization increasingly have IT and data, then one can see how the well-beingness is for each department. But because you need a cyber security or cyber and IT department to kind of manage at that operational level, they maybe get the brunt of it because they're the ones that have to make sure that each department is working with the correct data and correct technology. So they have a little bit of to do. But in well-beingness, it is though for each department to be aware. So there may be I like to think there's a silver lining for improving the awareness of cybersecurity, because that's a big issue, cybersecurity awareness. How do you do it? How do you do it? So this may be a kind of indirect way that every department has to be more aware of what technology they're using, what data it has on there, you know, asset management. It kind of sounds kind of big circular, but each department has to be aware of that. And when they are aware of their devices and their data flows, then that can alleviate some of the pressure from the IT department. because technically, even with the IIA and ISACA and in the audit side, it's the data owners who are usually the head of business sales departments or the CRM or manufacturing. It's the owners, sorry, the heads of the departments that are the owner of the data. So they should be brought in to help, in my view, alleviate some of that pressure on the cybersecurity side. So I'm reinforcing, that both the comment of the well-beingness is everyone's responsibility, but also cyber tech people are the ones that have to kind of steer a little bit how that's used. And my question was that there was a comment earlier that the IIA showed no interest in this area, and maybe that person might comment on why. Maybe they do it in another way.
No idea. I think the thing is that you're right, but if you look at some of the changes over while I've been in information security, I remember way back when 7799 was the only standard. It was one. How many standards have we got today? Now I can tell you that one of my friends who's worked on 27001, if you look at every single standard within the series and you count the number of pages, it comes to several thousand pages. That's just one series. That doesn't cover everything. If you look at the changes, apart from the standards that we've got, legislation that we've got, there's a whole load more than we ever had. If you look at the attacks that we've had and the number of attacks, the number of malware, the number of applications that we've got that we have to care for, that we have to worry, compared to, let's say, 20 years ago, when most of the technology that we were looking at in information security were the IT department's technology, which was the printers and the laptops and the desktops. That was about it. What have we had since then? We've had mobile devices. We've had IoT and 1001 IoT devices. We've had social media. We've had cloud and lots of variations of cloud. We've got all these apps. We've got 1001 things, so that the connections between where everything was on a laptop or a desktop compared to what it is today is a completely different environment. And there's so many more applications and everyone's developing their own applications. So all of these things are going to impact and affect the work that we do. And that stress that we're talking about is as a result of 1001 things out there that are impacting what we are trying to do on a daily basis. If you look back to the attack that Sony had way back, I think it's 2009. And at that time, when there were in that particular attack, if you look at the way that things used to work at that time and how they work today, at that time, Sony used to work with many marketing organizations all around the world. And they all worked as a marketing organization where the marketing organization would set up websites on behalf of Sony and they would manage them. And you know what? I heard a figure at that time, and I cannot remember the exact figure, but that Sony had probably several thousand intellectual property sitting elsewhere outside of their organization where somebody else was managing it. But as a result of what happened, they started to bring it all in over a period of time so they could manage it more effectively. And those are the sorts of things that we've had. And more recently, if you look at digital transformation happening over COVID, it was pushed by COVID, but all those digital transformation programs that we've had, they all add to the pressure that we were talking about. So that event that I said that prompted the foundation, it was as a result of, as I said, so many different things all happening. And yet we've coped with it. There's not been that many industries that have changed so fast, so quickly, and are carrying on changing so quickly. And I think that's been the driver that we've seen that's pushed the work that we're doing and how we're doing that work as well.
It's the complexity and velocity, right?
Yeah.
Velocity of change.
Absolutely. And now we've got AI.
Yeah.
Mm.
And within AI, you have several kind of say different kind of AIs, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people say AI, but it's a broad term.
Yeah.
And then you have complexity of AI.
I mean, a couple of years ago, due to the work I do around IoT, most of it's been around what we call connected devices or smart built environment. And the work around CCTV, I used to tell people, look, if your CCTV supplier tries to sell you AI, don't buy it. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get your data. They're probably using big data analytics and they're going to pretend it's AI. And we've seen that earlier this year. I think a couple of companies that went for IPO or tried to get funding. There was one company, and I cannot remember the name of it, which had 500 employees that were effectively simulating AI in the background. And they were trying to sell this service in the US and around the world. But all it was a bunch of people simulating
It's
AI.
quite similar to Amazon Fresh, right?
Yeah.
So Amazon Fresh, think AI enabled the, your shopping when you go into, cashless register, you just go in, grab stuff and go out. Their AI model was not working, or data science model was not working. So they had hundreds of people sitting in India monitoring and doing online billing, watching everybody. So, it's quite similar story.
Absolutely. So I mean, as I said, I was telling people, look, don't buy it. It doesn't work. But now we're in a position right now. The reality is AI is working. And there are several AI out there, and it's going to increase. They're going to start doing a lot more. It's going to change the environment that we're working in. Whether it's AI is being used for attacks, or it's being used to find vulnerabilities, or it's being used to target individuals within an organization, whatever it is, it's going to complicate things. That's the point of making.
I think the point also is, just to add, I see it in the industry, because the digital landscape is evolving, again, with the great velocity due to AI, you have not only to meet your KPIs within the company you're working for, but you also have to keep up to speed with the change. And that's also adding pressure, because otherwise you feel, I'm being left behind.
Yeah.
So it all adds up.
Yeah. I was talking earlier this year on an AI event, so I've done some work around AI, and to that point, I was advocating that you don't need one strategy for AI, you need several strategies, because the event was around governance of AI. So I was saying, if you're looking at governance, your immediate term strategy must be, how can we leverage AI for greater productivity? You do not want to lose out on productivity because you're weighing too much on the governance. Your longer term or medium term strategy can focus on governance, because in the immediate term, the chances are, in the same way when we had mobile phones, we had social media, cloud services, all of these things, when they enter our enterprises, they come and we don't know what the state of play really is in the early stages. Same with AI. We won't necessarily know until it's been around a while. Then we get a better idea. And that's when things hopefully become a bit more manageable. Sorry, I think we're drifting a bit.
Yeah, drifting a bit. So I think any other questions from the floor before we close?
Just on that last point, do you find that people are still working out how AI can help their business needs? This is what you were saying, their objectives. They say, oh, we want to use AI because it makes us look good and we think it'll improve our reputation, when in fact they haven't actually sat down. And the other is that robotic process automation and automated workflows may actually be what's needed rather than AI. And apparently there are many more companies that sell automated workflow solutions than there are AI.
Yeah, I mean, people don't necessarily know how to use the tools they've got. Microsoft did research many years ago, and it's still true today, which in your office, Microsoft Office, the average user, how many of the built-in functionalities, how many of those do they actually use? And the research showed that the average user uses no more than 5% of all the functionality. They could do that without a word processor. They're using it like a typewriter. Yeah. And within our own organization, we've got had a trainee, and he won't mind me saying this, but he was doing some work and I asked him to use ChatGPT. I said, just throw in some things. And the long and short of it was, I thought to myself, what he's coming up with is interesting. I'm sure there's something not quite right here. So I said to him, right, show me what you're doing. And he showed me what he's doing. So what he was doing was he was acting like a student, which is he pulled together what he thought was the right answer, put it into ChatGPT and said, is this correct? And ChatGPT commented on it. And I said, that's not the way to use AI. I said, what you should be doing is ask it the problem that you've got and ask it to solve it. When it solves it, then pick holes in what it solved and ask it to correct that. And before long, he had a document that was difficult to manage. But he showed it to me. He said, "Oh, well, look, this is really good. I've got all this." He thought that was the answer, and I said, "That's not quite right. What you've got there is far too long. What you need to do is go back to ChatGPT and say, look, if I needed to cover the key points in half an hour, which key points would I need to cover?" It gave him the answer, and that's what the right answer was. He went from one extreme to the other. So your point, in terms of AI, people don't know what they need or how to use AI in a way that it works for them. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's not.
Well, I
Sorry.
think we are approaching the time. So our Vice Chair, Andy, is here. Andy, would you like to share something or say something?
What I would like to know is that we now have news about the industry which has been affected by cybersecurity. Now, is there any government help to find out the vulnerability of the rest of industry who haven't been affected yet?
Honestly, I do not know the answer to that question.
Well, I think there are what do you call it, community groups or information sharing group, ISGs, set up by NCSC. And they are one for retail, one for financial sector. So information is shared in that closed group. And you have to be a member to get that information from NCSC.
Okay, thank
So
you.
there are some forums available. Yeah, very good question. Anybody else? Yeah, sorry.
I was just saying, sorry, I can't help.
Right. Thank you very much all for attending online. Now we're gonna switch to networking side of the things. So have a good rest of the evening and yeah, just follow. I'll just go back if I can. Just if you're interested in knowing more about the organization, I'm just going to go back to the slide if I can. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just put this on for a few more minutes. If you want to join or reach out to mental health in cybersecurity, this is the QR code as well there for you to complete the survey. I think slide decks will be available, right? And recorded session will be on IRMA SG YouTube channel in a few days. And last but not least, just remember there's another event next Tuesday on 14th of October and the AGM on 11th of November. So if you're interested in joining the committee, please fill up the nomination form and send it as soon as possible. So thank you very much.